Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy sounding off early this morning in Munich.
Ukraine will never accept deals made behind our backs without our involvement.
Zelensky's address coming hours after meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, who called for peace to end the brutal 3-year war with Russia, but did not clarify concessions or what it would mean for each country. It comes after a slew of mixed messaging where Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had firmly ruled out any U.S. troop involvement in Ukraine, then walked that back. Earlier this week, a phone call between Russia's President Putin and President Trump raised fears in Kyiv that Ukraine was being frozen out of the negotiations, with the White House also downplaying the prospects of Ukraine joining NATO. And with regard to that, Zelenskyy said that Ukraine's army would need to double in size if the country can't join NATO. He said that membership is the best security guarantee for the country. Well, who better to break all of this down than former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, retired 4-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis, who, by the way, is making his first day appearance here as a CNN senior military analyst. He's a partner at the Carlyle Group, a global investment firm. He also serves on the board of advisors for a handful of defense-related companies and is the author of a great new book, The Restless Wave, available in paperback, a novel of the United States Navy. Admiral, congratulations. How wonderful to have you here. Let me begin by asking you this. Did Secretary Hegseth make a rookie mistake this week when he said, essentially, it's unrealistic to believe that Russia will surrender any land?
Let's back up and point out that we're, a month into the administration. The most complex thing any administration does is sync up its messaging, particularly on global security. So no, it's not a well-oiled machine at this point. And you're hearing some difference in nuance between Hegseth, J.D. Vance, President Trump. I think that's understandable. Watch for Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, very capable fellow North Floridian, to kind of get this process pulled into place. I think it will. Here's the real point, Michael, and the real question is, how does this thing land? Where is it going? And I think what you see is going to be about what you get, meaning Putin will probably end up with about 20% of present-day Ukraine, but the other 80% will sail on, free and democratic. And I think maybe not immediate NATO membership, but certainly security guarantees and perhaps ultimate NATO membership. That's how I see it from this morning.
What's the response from Europe to all of this? I mean, Ukraine is concerned that it is being shut out. The Europeans they're worried that they too don't have a seat at the table.
Yeah, we have a saying, I mentioned North Florida a minute ago, which is sometimes you got to be for what's going to happen anyway. And I think that light is going on for the Europeans, meaning they're going to up their defense spending significantly. I think you'll see France, Poland, United Kingdom, and the Nordics, all of whom have significant history, shall we say, with Russia, really step up, increase defense spending, and increase support to Ukraine, Michael.
And as a former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, the view from NATO to all of the events of this past week are what?
I remain cautiously optimistic about NATO. And in fact, back to messaging, what I'm hearing at every level from the incoming administration is, hey, we're going to push NATO to spend more on defense, the European wing, Canada, but the value proposition of NATO remains quite significant. Collectively, Michael, and you know this, a lot of people don't realize it, the collective defense budget of Europe, the European part of NATO, is actually the second largest defense budget in the world. It's not optimized, it's not rationalized perfectly, but if they can get their defense spending up, and I think they can, up toward 3%, I think that value proposition keeps NATO in the game.
Can we go back to the potential resolution, that which you said earlier, Admiral, in terms of how the map might look when it all ends and the land that's been captured, not just since this war began, but going back to 2014? I don't think you made specific reference to Crimea, But I think implied in what you've told us so far is that that would remain Russian.
It would, and that is tragic on the one hand, because Putin will be able to say to the Russian people, look, I've definitively brought Crimea, and oh, by the way, the 4 provinces of Donbass, the so-called land bridge that connects Crimea. Putin will say to the Russian people, hey, I locked it in, I made it happen. Except if you ask me who would win the war in the scenario I just outlined, I think Putin has a hard time saying he wins. He ends up with 20% of Ukraine, most of which he held on to from 2014. He has got no control over the other 80%. Last time I checked, when you get a 20% on a test, that's an F. And here's the real punchline, and it is a punch. 1 million young Russian men gone. Out of a pre-war population of 75 million young Russian men, they've lost 300,000 dead, 400,000 wounded, 500,000 have left the country. And when that babushka goes to the grave of Ivan to put some dried flowers on it, I don't think she's feeling really good about the 20% Putin got on the test. That's how I think this comes out.
Final quick question. Do you think that the assessment that you've just offered, pretty compelling, will be accepted by President Zelenskyy?
The short answer to the question is 3 words. I don't know. But I think Zelenskyy also needs to realize the realities that are going to surround him here. But here's the good news. NATO is going to be his backstop. I think there'll be European troops, perhaps along a demilitarized zone. Sweden and Finland have joined NATO. The Baltic is a NATO lake. Defense budget is many times that of Russia. I think if I'm Zelenskyy, I don't love that deal, but I'd probably end up taking it.
How great for CNN to have you as senior military analyst. Thank you so much, Admiral.
Thanks, Michael. See you soon.
Via social media, Catherine, what do we have from the world of X, formerly known as Twitter? After decades of being only one of a handful of nations meeting the 2% GDP contribution to NATO and billions of aid for Ukraine, apparently half of which is unaccounted for, it's time to put Americans first, says Skip Jordan. I liked what I heard from Admiral Stavridis, because I'm sure that the perception among many is, wait a minute, Putin gets to keep land that shouldn't be his, and there's no NATO membership for Ukraine, at least in the short term. But by the calculus that he offered, I think I agree with him that it ends up being a fail on the part of Russia. Let's hope that Ukraine sees it the same way.